What do men want?
Manifests itself in relationships, and you feel it in relationships, and they can be very powerful spiritually. And if that's what you need, that's what you should go for.
And she said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. This is public access television coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. So many issues involving men and women remain vague and unclear today. So to attempt a clarification of subjects important to women and to gain an insight into their view of the quote-unquote emerging men's movement, we've invited Mary Morell, a writer and feminist and co-owner of the Full Circle Bookstore, a women's bookstore here in Albuquerque. Welcome to the program, Mary.
Thank you.
Good of you to come down here on such short notice and spend some time with us. I thought we might take the first segment and maybe get you to tell us a little bit about what feminism is and isn't.
Well, feminism is such a broad topic that I'm going to have to start off with a disclaimer.
Okay.
It doesn't have, like the Catholic Church, a pope and a set of things you have to believe or you're not a feminist, although I know some people who would argue with me on that.
You bet.
So what I say, I'm saying as one person who calls herself a feminist, and I recognize a lot of people are going to take issue with what I say. So now that I've done my disclaimer, I'll tell you what I think. I think feminism is about broadening the definition of the word human until it includes women. I don't think today that we do that. Now, what feminism is not about, which is what's propped up in the media, is that it's about women wanting to replace all the men in power with women in power. At least the feminism I believe in, that's not the point. I think because those people who define power as the most important thing in the universe, when they think about somebody else trying to take it away from them, they get terrified. And so there's a tremendous amount of anger and hostility toward any woman that does not fulfill what's often called the doormat role. And I think most women have experienced the incredible pressure to be quiet. Feminists are not quiet people for the most part, which you may discover
Well,
today.
that's why we've got you down here today, as a matter of fact. Yeah, well, you know, we had a guest a few shows ago talking about men and control issues and communication skills. And some of what you're saying is true because he was making the point that a lot of men lack communication skills, and what happens is in dealing with women, as soon as they lose control of the situation, they become afraid because they're not equipped to deal with emotions in the same way women are. And naturally, the next step from fear is aggression, you know, for men. So,
Well, I think for anybody.
You bet. So what are some of the goals and directions that feminists are trying to take today? You know, what's important to women?
I think the most important thing is to help people look at another human being with less fear. Whether that human being be a woman, whether that human being be a black, Native American, Russian, or even a child. It is amazing the number of people who are afraid of children.
A lot of people fear the love in children, I think, that the spontaneity. And also there's a lot of resentment of the child because of that freedom and spontaneity the child does have, I think.
They want to
sometimes.
control it.
You bet.
Control is an issue that you have when you do not trust. If you trust somebody implicitly, you don't worry about control issues because you assume that what they will be doing is something that will be for your good.
Right. There are a couple of extremes, I guess, in the way feminism has been portrayed to me, and most of it has been, a lot of it has been through the media. On the one hand, you have extreme feminism, which seems to not, that men are bad. A lot of our baggage and shame comes out of that kind of stuff. And on the other hand, you seem to have women who are not interested in feminism at all, and as if some of the problems that women experience don't even exist. So would you say that you're kind of mainstream between those two
I'm on
points?
the lunatic fringe.
Are you on the lunatic fringe?
Definitely.
How do you define lunatic?
Anybody who decides that they will look at reality with their own eyes and not the eyes of the media or the eyes of their parents or the eyes of the church sees things that other people say are unreal. Lunatic fringe. I see things that other people tell me are not real.
Right. We'll be right back with you. We're going to take a short break here for another book review in our Worth Reading series. Mike Kruchowski is going to take a quick look at an important book called The Casanova Complex. So please stay with us. We'll be right back, all you Casanovas.
Welcome to another book review in our Worth Reading series. Today we take a look at The Casanova Complex by Peter Trachtenberg, a book about compulsive lovers and their women. Do you remember Gary Hart? Gary who, you say? Gary Hart, the would-be presidential contender, whose campaign was brought to an abrupt halt by the revelations of his extramarital liaisons. According to Trachtenberg, Hart is the ultimate in compulsive lovers, a man who virtually threw away his chance for sitting in the White House, all because of his weakness for chasing women. Although few men face such a consequence, Trachtenberg says compulsive lovers are often willing to commit one act of self-destruction after another in their quest for women. This book is one attempt to discover why. Trachtenberg's work delves into the past, back to those legendary lovers Casanova and Don Juan, in his attempt to discover what drives some men to seduction. Not surprisingly, he finds that women often reinforce the Casanova's behavior. Part of the Casanova's appeal to women actually lies in the threat he poses. As one woman once said of Lord Byron, another famous lover, "He's mad, bad, and dangerous to know." And that's exactly what she found irresistible. A recent survey by Sam Keene, author of Fire in the Belly, found similar attitudes among today's women. If compulsive skirt chasing is a problem worthy of our attention, then it appears both men and women will have roles to play in helping break its hold on our society. Most of the book is devoted to Trachtenberg's extensive interviews with modern-day Casanovas, whom he categorizes into 6 basic types. What did he discover? A couple points are worth noting. Like the historical Don Juan, some men are obsessed not with sex, but rather with the humiliation and deception of their sexual conquests. As one man put it, he offered an edited version of himself, never presenting himself to his lovers as he truly knew himself to be. Frequently, these men don't enjoy the sensual pleasures of sex for themselves. Instead, they often feel compelled to prove their sexual prowess by assuming responsibility for their lovers' orgasms, as if their own don't really matter. Sometimes these Casanovas never have orgasms. If this sounds all too familiar, perhaps it would be worth looking into a support group like Sexaholics Anonymous. Well, what might a responsible modern-day version of Casanova look like? Trachtenberg really doesn't have an answer, and it might well be there just isn't any, considering the danger of AIDS today. The author writes with all the zeal of a reformed sinner, because he himself was once a compulsive lover, and this experience certainly colors his judgment. Even so, The Casanova Complex by Peter Trachtenberg is an interesting and thought-provoking book with some worthwhile messages for both men and women. I hope you'll take a look at it sometime.
In Salisbury, Maryland, the hungry are being fed. In Wind Falls, Indiana, a man who learned to read at 47 is making sure others learn earlier. Every day, someone in America is doing something to light up another life. But there is so much more to do. The light to do it is within us all. We only need to share it. Call the Points of Light Foundation. Do something good. Feel something real.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. This is Public Access Television coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. We hope you found a short review of Peter Trachtenberg's book interesting and informative. We think it says a lot for both men and women who might be interested. We're speaking with Mary Morell, a feminist and co-owner of Full Circle Books here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Mary, tell me what your perception of this men's movement thing is, and as it's emerging today, how do you perceive it?
I have to admit, I don't see the men's movement any more monolithically than I see feminism. I see a lot of different directions it's going. So when I define the men's movement, I'm defining what, for me, in my perception, is two separate directions. One of them I would call the Stoltenberg direction. He's the guy who wrote Refusing to be a Man, a book that received little national publicity, does not do large workshops where people pay $500, and one that I heartily approve of.
Well, you should get a copy to our producer, and I promise you he'd probably do you a book review on it and get it.
It's an interesting book. Parts of it, I think, are pretty outrageous, but I've already identified myself as lunatic fringe, so we'll know why I like that.
Well, okay.
But
well, you don't look like a lunatic to me, so.
One of the things that he talks about in there is men of good conscience. And I think it is a real difficulty for men of good conscience to deal with directions in their life. There is no question that if you analyze what is happening in the world today, majority of decisions for the entire Earth's population is being made by a small group of rich, white, European heritage males.
Okay.
You're not in that group.
That's true.
But I do think part of what happens is we're made to feel responsible for people who are like us, whether we've participated in their decisions or not. So if a feminist does something that a man doesn't like, he carries that feeling over into his response to me. Men's movement, I believe to be a movement of men of good conscience who are trying to separate themselves from the kind of horrifying decisions that have characterized the destruction of the earth and many of its peoples. To say, on the surface I may appear to belong to this group, but I myself am removing myself from it because I cannot in good conscience stay there. Then the problem comes, where do you stand? Where is the platform for a man of good conscience who removes himself from that group? And I see the men's movement primarily as trying to create a platform on which men can stand with comfort and self-respect.
Great. Do you think there's some common ground that men and women can begin to approach their development of a mutual relationship? Are there common issues?
I don't think the world would have 7 billion people in it if we didn't have some common ground.
Right. There certainly seems to be a lot of dissension out there. You know, they say that 50% of marriages fail. Of course, on the flip-flop of that, I look at it like 50% are making it, and that's probably pretty good for the times we live in. But
well, it's kind of funny because I was listening to NPR driving home one day. They were reviewing a book. The author said that she looked at marriages in the United States and I think it was Connecticut before the American Revolution, and 45% of the marriages failed then.
Right, right.
So I'm not sure that this is a new thing that's happening.
Right. So there's not a battle of the sexes going on.
Oh, there's a definite battle and there's a lot of casualties. The casualties are the souls of men and the bodies of women.
Uh-huh.
In my opinion.
God, that's great stuff, Mary. Say that again. The casualties are?
The casualties are the souls of men and the bodies of women.
Okay.
I think starting at a very early age, we try and teach boys to be soulless. We teach them that if they are uninterested in doing harm to somebody they've never met, there's something wrong with them. Whether we teach that through the Young American Football League, pretty scary. Go out there and kill. I've heard coaches say that to little bitty boys.
Right.
What is that saying to the boy? He's saying to the boy, if you don't want to harm somebody, you're not a man. So then in the boy's mind, he begins to equate being a man with harming people. This is horrible. How can he live with this? How can he have any self-respect? How can he have a soul? The only thing he can possibly do is to walk away from his soul.
A lot of the focus for men in the movement is to believe that we have received a wound to our souls and to begin to deal with the pain of that. One of the examples they speak of is that the difference between macho and what men in the movement are trying to do is that macho, in denying the pain of life and in denying the experience of life and what has happened to us, acts that out and inflicts it on the world. Through his denial, and that what men hopefully can do is begin to accept the pain and just accept that the world is not a real nice place all the time, and that along with the joy there's a tremendous amount of suffering as well, and that somebody has to carry that, and they have to consciously carry that. So
I think the other hard thing for men is to realize that they are living in a privilege that has been bought by other people's pain. That, just take for example,
well,
all
see,
of us,
when you say other people's pain, it's like there's only two peoples. There's men and there's women. So are you saying, clarify that for me a little bit.
Well, let me go back to my equation that I think what we look at that we need to turn away from are the decisions of the rich, white, European heritage males in power.
I thought it was the Japanese and the Arabs who were financially in power right now, but
I suspect if you look at where the money is coming from and where the money is going, that these multinational corporations are primarily controlled by the groups I've mentioned. And for sure, the countries are, other than Japan.
What's the old Paul Simon line? It's a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. And what we see, for example, let's just take the city of Albuquerque. If somebody came to the city of Albuquerque and said, I'd like to perform an experiment in this city that's going to make me $200,000 to $300,000 a year, and you're going to have, in 10 or 15 years, 8 to 10 children a year dying from this experiment. Do you think anybody would say yes? Yet the city council of the city of Albuquerque is contemplating letting Sandia dump nuclear waste into the water system.
I hadn't heard that. That's certainly shocking if it's true.
It's true. It's coming up before the city council. This is going to hurt people, and the people it's going to hurt are all human beings.
Right, right. Water's going to be a big issue here in the Southwest in a few years as well. You may be paying $1 a glass or something when you go into a restaurant. Let's We're going to take another short break and commentary by our producer, Mike Kruchowski, and he's going to be talking about the need for a little bit better and a little bit more communication. Pardon my stuttering tongue, but please stay with me, and we will be right back.
Occasionally, someone will ask me why a show on men's issues will include women as guests. Some men believe we should limit our discussions to what men have to say about men's issues. I say that's nonsense. We need to have more, not less, discussion between men and women about our sexual roles. First of all, most of us have noticed that women make up half of our population. Any movement which attempts to disregard 50% of the population is bound to fail. Besides, men and women genuinely like one another and want to find better ways to get along. Second, women have many worthwhile observations to offer us men. We can't hope to understand how men are perceived if we aren't willing to listen to what women have to say. Not all perceptions are accurate reflections of fact, but understanding how women perceive men is an important first step in correcting that situation. Finally, if men want their concerns to be heard by women, it only makes sense to practice what we advocate. Let's truly listen to one another. I think we'll be amazed at how much we have in common.
Tonight, Dolores had a few drinks, did some crack, and ended up another tragic story. Only she doesn't know it yet. Drugs make you forget. And if you forget how risky sex can be, you could catch the AIDS virus. AIDS, another way drugs can kill.
Hello. Research indicates we Americans create too much garbage. So I have spent years developing worms that eat garbage at astonishing rates. Some eat more than others.
There's an easier way to save the world. Recycle. To find out more, dial 1-800-CALL-EDF.
Honey, it's Mom. Please let me in. I'm worried.
Learn to see the signs of mental illness. 2 out of 3 people who get help get better. For a free booklet, call the American Mental Health Fund.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. This is Public Access Television coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas, and we hope our producer, Mike Kruchowski's comments provided some food for thought for you. We're speaking with Mary Morell, a writer and feminist here in Albuquerque. And Mary, the issue of family and fathering is of great importance to men today, and so much of society's ills are blamed and focused on family disintegration. How does feminism see the family?
Probably one of the most divisive issues in feminism. My personal theory is that something that hasn't worked in 10,000 years we should give up on. This experiment has failed. When you say dysfunctional family, it's almost an oxymoron. I mean, there are no functional families that I've ever met. Every human being I've ever talked to comes from a dysfunctional family. If we built cars that didn't go down the road, we'd say, maybe we should try a new design. It's my theory that maybe we need to try a new design. I think a lot of the ills that we're dealing with come from the fact that in families, fathers are given all the power and mothers all the responsibility.
Isn't that changing?
There is a myth that it's changing. In fact, what's happening is the fathers are taking to the road. They're just splitting because they don't have responsibility. They can always pick up a new family to show power in. They're just abdicating, just walking out. This is why the single-family parent, and let's face it, we're talking 85% of single-parent families are headed by women. This is not a male phenomena.
And there's a disempowerment. That's one of the issues Tom and Tom Reinhardt, our guest on a previous program, was talking about, is that so many young people, and that seems to me to be one of the issues that we're trying to deal with. When you talk about dysfunctional families, what we're talking about is children who are damaged by the actions of adults, both men and women, and a lot of times placed in emotionally charged situations that as children they shouldn't have to deal with. That whole concept of what is going to, how do you stop that dysfunction? So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just think that that's.
But you did it so nicely.
That's what I did it. Hey, so what are you saying? You don't think that the man-woman-child functions?
Well, in the first place, man, woman, child is a very new definition of family. That's only been since about 1935. Before that, a family was an extended family, grandparents, children, maybe sometimes even four generations
That's
in
an
a home.
agrarian model, basically, though.
Well, agrarian, the model we're ending up now with is the one that is the easiest for corporations to move around. I mean, the smaller the family is, the easier it is to slot these units into a place. The bigger the component, the less interchangeable it is. So you want nice small components so that you can plug them in anywhere and they're all uniform. There's nothing more uniform than a mother, a child, and a man separate. And that's what we have come to in this country. If you think mommy and daddy and baby is an American family, I have news for you. Less than 20% of the families in the United States of America are mommy, daddy, and their children.
And I think the scenario in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley was all the children were raised by the state, basically, and there was no family.
I do think that would
be
be
worse. Do you
worse.
feel? Let me ask you this. This is part of my soapbox sometimes. I'm beginning to think that a lot of Americans, both men and women, are realizing that the heart and the soul are what matter, and that the bent of politics in the future is going to have to take that into account, no matter what happens to.
Funny you should say that.
We have a minute to wrap up here, so just get it out and let's.
The feminist movement has always said the personal is political. And that's what they're talking about. You can't take the heart and soul out of politics any more than you can take them out of men and end up with anything other than a very sick society.
I see. Well, I'd like to remind you that this program is the first of a two-part series. You might keep an eye out for the second. We'd like to thank everyone, especially Mary, for coming down and sharing some time with us. We'd also like to thank our viewers for watching. If you'd like to comment on this show or for phone number and address, look for phone number and address in the credits. And always interested in your feedback. And I'd just like to remind you to stand if you can, run if you have to, but don't you quit trying at all. We'll be back again sometime. See you. The light went out on the camera, and
You don't know if they got you or not.
I don't know.